What does it mean to be undone by God? Today, Dr. Hud McWilliams is returning to have a conversation with us. We'll be talking about this and other matters of the heart. Hud, thanks for coming back to be with us.
You bet. My joy.
There's a lot of discussion about accountability right now as our Christian culture has experienced so much lack of it and so much disappointment in some of our leaders. And so we're going to be talking about self-awareness. How do we deal with our weaknesses? And then we're also going to talk about accountability and does it really work? So, Hud, what best allows self-awareness to happen in our lives? What promotes that?
It's a great question, I think. Great in the sense that it's often not asked. I think we make an assumption that we are self-aware because we live with ourselves 24/7, 365 since we were born. And so we make an assumption. And assumptions are deadly, always. We make the assumption that we know who we are. We make the assumption that we know our experiences. We make the assumption that nobody else can understand us, really. We make the assumption that what I've experienced details who I am. The fact of the matter is, if you step back just a bit, take a deep breath now and walk with me for just a second, step back just a bit, you'll find that experience actually, instead of being the best teacher, has two qualities. One, it's the hardest teacher, often, and number two, it's limiting. So when I have an experience, I have a tendency to galvanize my sense about it, my perception, my perspective of it. And I think, well, now I know how to swim, or I know how to drive a car, or I know something or other. And there's some truth to it, but there's always more. And so when the Bible talks about self-awareness, it actually lands us in the realm of humility. And humility is this tricky thing. They give you a most humble person button. You shouldn't wear it, probably, because it's going to be denying the very thing that he won the most humble for the month. But the problem is that all humility means to me is two things. One, I'm a learner. I'm in a learning posture. I'm willing to learn. And number two, that I need to take my place. I'm trying to belong where I'm supposed to be. So self-acceptance to me is essentially finding out who I am at the core, without my experience, without my history, without somebody else telling me, without my performance, without anything external. How do I get that? How do I get so that I ask some questions about what's going on inside of me? Who am I apart from being married, apart from doing this job, apart from sitting in this chair, apart from whatever? And most of us are stuck with external data. We take the external data and we say, that must be me because that's what I've experienced. True self-acceptance, it seems like to me, grows from a curiosity, an interest in, wow, where did that thought come from? And I didn't even know I had the capacity to think that way. And wow, what's that about? Anyway, so I think this is just a sidebar. Maybe you can talk about it some other time. I really believe, after walking with the Lord since I was 7, in some way or another, I would say he made me most like him in how I can think, least like him in what I can do. And the gap between the two is enormous. So I stay kind of frustrated in my mind all the time because I can think about a whole lot more things than I can do. I'm not God. God can think about them and do them. We can't. And he made us specifically that way. And so finite creatures are made finite in the garden before the fall. Finiteness is our limitations. Limitations show up in terms of our ability to accept who we are. I think when Paul talked about weakness, he talked about his weaknesses. I think all he was saying is that I'm finite. I don't think he was saying he was weak in the sense of I can't do anything, or I don't have any gifts, or all of a sudden I'm uneducated or something. I think what he was saying was, no, I just simply am limited. I'm not God. And it's a whole different orientation. So self-awareness acts to set me free. And it means that I now have access to joy as the predominant source of energy for my life. I am okay with me. You don't have to like me. You don't have to agree with me. You don't have to understand me. I'm still okay. You can't take that away from me. Now, do we have to fight with that? Sure. If I was John the Baptist and about to get my head chopped off, I think I'd ask the same question he asked. Are we following the right guy?
Yes, yes.
I'd
Read
be
that recently. That's very interesting to think about. Yeah.
I'd be scared spitless. But his self-awareness said, I need to ask this question because I'm willing to follow him. I got that straight. But is he right? Am I sure? What? Well, why? Why? Because life doesn't come in this nice
Neat.
wrapped up package.
Yeah.
We have to clean the chicken before we get to eat it, and I just think a lot of people don't know how to clean a chicken. So self-awareness to me is pushing against my history as being the definer, whether it's a beautiful history or a traumatic history, it doesn't really matter. They both equally distort. And then shifting my awareness to God made me in such a way that I will be the same person regardless of where I would find myself in Earth's history. Plunk me down in 500 BC or 500 AD or today. It doesn't matter. I would be the same DNA being in some way. And the Bible says that I'm more of that. Well, self-awareness means that I don't deny parts of myself along the way. I recognize that I am a sexual creature. I recognize that I am a, desirous creature. I recognize that I want to achieve something. I recognize that I have these desires built into me. And so desire then becomes this huge thing to talk about when you're talking about self-awareness. What drives me? What energizes the inside of me? Is it a mixture? Almost always it is. Is it a mixture? Where does that mixture come from? How can I sort that mixture out and say, this was given to me by my experience, and this is who I am separate from that? I've got to be able to do that at some point in time. If I can't, then I can't address myself in any kind of meaningful way. And I want to, if you'll indulge, let me indulge myself, I guess is what I'm doing. Indulge me for just a moment. I'd like to talk about David. This is a real shortened version of this. But I think David, who in the Old Testament, there was more written about David than anybody. And actually somebody said there were more words written about David than about Jesus in the New Testament in terms of sheer volume. 100 pages or so, we have David's life from pretty much from birth to death. And we don't have most leaders that way. Most leaders, we get a snapshot of their life. So we're guessing. So today, as we look at leaders in the church or leaders in our lives, most often those people, we just getting a snapshot. We don't have their whole life. We don't know what the influences were, what the impact of trauma was. We don't know those things. And maybe they're unaware of them as well.
We just tend to see them on a pedestal.
That's right.
And we don't see, yeah, you're right. We don't see the before.
And we don't frame it well, and we get in trouble with it, et cetera. And so David performed, and we talked about this. He was almost perfect in his performance. He just was amazing in terms of his capacity. He was a leader, a judge, a ruler, a king, a warrior, a poet, sometimes dancer. He was amazing in terms of his production. And he did it well. I mean, he writes a third of the Psalms or more. I don't know how many, but a bunch. And we still revel in them today. They still feed our souls, and God still uses them. But it's the two of the three areas that comprise an adult's life. One's production. David got an A. One is self-awareness. David flunked. And another one is intimacy. And David flunked that as well. So 2 out of 3 adult behaviors. We all need to learn how to do intimate relationships. We all need to learn how to do uh, relationship with ourselves. That's self-awareness. And we also need to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. That's production. So if you think about David, he has this time when he violates Bathsheba, kills her husband. So he has a sexual sin and a murder. And a few stories later, after Nathan comes along and says to him, "You're the man." And David says, "You're right. I got caught." Well, he got caught from the outside. His culture caught him, not his conscience, his culture. And when he wasn't caught from the inside, what happens is that you set up a defensive system. Put your hands up. I'm going to self-protect. I did get caught. I'm going to admit it. I can't do anything about it. I'll do my time. I'll hate every bit of it. Instead of saying, I did it. I'm the guy, and I understand it, and I'm going to take ownership of it. The reason I can say that I don't think David took ownership is when the same sins, sexual sin and murder, showed up among his children. He had 19 named boys. He didn't do anything. He was passive toward them. He was just stood there. He didn't say, ouch, bad. He didn't discipline him. He didn't do anything. And he cried a lot with Absalom after Absalom murdered Amnon. But the point is, eventually, all those kids were killed by Absalom. I mean, it was just a mess. David's shame stopped him. David's inability to get at the core, because in the story of Nathan's talking to David and exposing him, trying to hold him accountable, Nathan says to David something very important. He says, God has taken away your sin. David didn't ask to have his sin taken away. God just took it away. Should be something that we understand in this side of the cross. That's what the finished work of Christ means. It means that your sins are gone. So now you're on a platform where you can stand up again and live out of joy and fullness. But most people don't. Most people don't have access to joy. Most people are still tripping over their own shame in some way. My point is, self-awareness helps me gather myself to my limited capacity, my finiteness, which is not contrary to the way God made us. That's actually the way he built us. The fall was what was contrary, not the finiteness. They both start with F, but they're really different ideas. So I think trying to get at the soul, trying to hold somebody accountable, you need to be able to hold yourself accountable. Now, in what context does that occur? I know guys say, tell me if you watch pornography. No, I haven't watched. Now tell me if you lied. The point is, until I can enter into restoring this relationship with myself that was broken at the fall, I'm in trouble. So my self relationship is the one that needs to be whole, and it's the one that we don't pay much attention to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, I just got off of my podium, so you can ask me another question.
Well, it's very interesting to look at David and look at his life and see what transpired and realize what he possibly held on to for the remainder of his life that really kept him from experiencing so many other things that God could have had for him. And it is there for us to learn from. Definitely.
Think about later, Hebrews 12, 1 to 3, somewhere in there, says Jesus, who for the joy set before him endured the cross. Then there comes this little phrase, despised the shame, scorned the shame.
Mm.
Not just of the cross. The cross was supposed to be a shameful event that everybody could see. That's why they hung these guys on a cross right next to some of the busiest highways in the country. It was not just that. I think what Jesus was saying, that he despised the concept of shame, that he was saying, there is no condemnation for those who are going to be in Christ Jesus. And I'm not condemned because I'm hanging on that. And I'm going to despise that shame. And David couldn't do that. David's shame kept talking to him, kept saying, yeah, but David, you did this. But David, you did this. He could have said, somebody asked me one time, what could he have done with Amnon after Amnon raped Tamar? one of his sisters.
Mhm.
And he could have done the very same thing God did with him, held him accountable for the consequences of the choice he made and forgiven him. That's parenting. But he didn't do either.
Yeah.
He didn't do anything. And shame is the thing that immobilizes him, I think. And it's kept him immobile until he was on his deathbed, basically, and telling Solomon some things to do. It just tells you how much of a battle we're in all the time. And it starts internally. So if we're going to be whole people function out of joy fundamentally. And the same joy that took Jesus to the cross. Did he want to go to the cross? No. Was he willing? Yes. There's a great verse. I was reading it just the other day. It's in John 10. It says, this is Jesus talking. He says, no one takes my life from me, but I lay it down on my own accord. So his point was, you could think you're taking it from him, but he's the one that was giving it.
Mm-hmm.
My wife once said to me, I think those people are using you. And I said, I'm the one that chooses whether I'm used or not. And I didn't know what I was saying at the time. I was so young. I didn't, I could hardly take the trash out. But the point was, I was bumping up against taking ownership of me. Don't tell me those are the people that are using me. I'm the one that decides whether I'm willing to be used or not.
I'd like to ask the question, can we really keep people accountable? We hear a lot about accountability groups, about an accountability partner. Do those really work?
Well, they work externally. Yes, they do work externally. And, it's like AA works. But it's a developmental, to me, it's a developmental phase. It's probably a necessary thing. But listen, accountability, external accountability, which is the only kind that we actually get. I can hold you accountable based on what I see. I cannot hold you accountable based on how you're thinking about it.
Right. So it all depends on whether people are going to be real or not, or whether they're just going to present a partial picture of who they are.
Whether they can. So there's a word that's used in our culture a lot, overused, I think, and this is just my little stick, so shoot me. But I think we misuse the word. I think we seek safety in order to be able to be held accountable internally. But I don't think that's the way God designed us. That's why I think the garden was designed to be disturbing. It was not a safe place. Satan had access to it. The snake had access to the garden. It was not safe. And it wasn't designed that way because safety wasn't the highest priority. We think safety needs to be the highest priority before I can come forth and divulge who I am. If I can live out of who I am, you can't blackmail me. You can't undermine me. You can't do that because you don't have any control over that. As a counselor, what I've found is that the church for years has been satisfied with behavioral change in people. If you stop doing something, then I feel like you've done what you need to do. But whole people are not interested in behavioral change. They're interested in changing the inside of you so that the behavior will follow. But we've tried to get the behavior to change what's going on the inside. And we've worked the equation backwards for such a long time. Science has worked it backwards. Behaviorism actually works it that way. It's driven that way. And it says that if we can change your behavior out here, we'll change what's going on the inside. I don't think that's true. I have no way of measuring it, but my hunch is that's not true. I just know that we're satisfied with what we see more than what's going on the inside. So I want transformation to take place. I asked a woman one time if I could keep her husband from ever looking at pornography again, would she be satisfied? And she squinted at me. She said, "You ask trick questions." And I said, maybe I do, but answer it, And she said, well, I think the answer is no, I wouldn't be satisfied, but the answer I want to give you is yes, I think I would be satisfied if you could guarantee that he'd never look at pornography again. I said, but you wouldn't know that anything's changed inside of him, would you? How does he get at that? How does he get at the transformative work that transforms the way he sees himself, that produces wholeness inside of him so that no matter what happens outside, he's anchored? There are a couple stories in scripture like this, fun to explore if you want to. I would just challenge you. They've been challenges to me. They remain challenges to me to try to understand them. One is Joseph in the Old Testament. What happened to him was, quote, unfair. He didn't deserve. He was a jerk, maybe, to his brothers, but he wasn't morally vicious with them, and he wasn't, you know, violating that kind of thing, even in the family. And he gets sold into slavery. I mean, we're talking about human trafficking.
Right.
There
Exactly.
it is.
That's the first example of it, isn't it?
And he is in raw form the victim. Does he act like a victim? I don't think so. I think you can read the story as it's presented to us in Scripture, and you can't find him, watch it, capitulating to victimhood. He doesn't look for somebody to blame.
Mhm.
How in the world does he keep anchored in that? Well, the only way I know is to talk about self-awareness. He had an awareness of whose he was. He was God's man, and out of that, he kept his feet on the ground. Take a guy like Job, same kind of story. It's freighted with all kinds of other stuff. We know the beginning of the story that Job doesn't know. The story is awful in every dimension. I have 3 children. I cannot imagine losing any of them. I can't. I just got done watching a series where a child was murdered, and that it was a story about how the family was managing it, and they didn't manage it very well. And nobody manages that very well. You know, well over 90% of the families that have a kid that dies, they don't make it. Family doesn't make it. Why? Well, because we're not doing this work. It doesn't mean, I mean, the pain doesn't go away because you blow up the family. Right. And we're back to something we talked about the first time, something about pain. How do I manage pain in my life? Well, if pain is something I need to avoid, then I'm in trouble. If suffering is something I need to get rid of, then I need to avoid it at all costs. I do woodworking, and it's suffering all the way until you're done with the product. I don't care what. I mean, you have to clean up a mess. You're always measuring twice and 3 times, and then you still have to go buy more wood. And, you know, I mean, however you do it, it's a form of disturbance, if you will, and uncomfortableness and tumultuousness in your life, and difficulties and issues and challenges. And it's those things through which we grow. So I think we're so satisfied with just making some abstract behavioral changes that we never get to helping people have enough space to actually hear what's going on in their own hearts. So here's one thing that helped me probably a month ago. A little blurb by C.S. Lewis from Screwtape Letters. If you know anything about Screwtape Letters, he's talking about how the demon world and Satan conceptualize fooling us on this planet. And so the demon is talking to his minions and trying to teach them about how they can fool us. And he says something like, music and silence. Those are the things that mark out Christianity. Well, we can't get rid of those. What we can do is create enough noise so that they can never be heard. Now think about this. Music represents beauty and joy and satisfaction and delight and pleasure and enjoyment and reverence and awe and exhilaration and all those things that we really enjoy. And if pleasure wasn't part of it, we wouldn't be able to give pleasure away. And giving pleasure to somebody is really what satisfies our soul, and on and on. And silence, what does silence do? Silence represents the ability to listen to your own soul and to hear the still small voice of the Spirit, so that you can have some access to your interior world and say, what is bubbling up in me? Where does that come from? What gives it energy? Why does it stay there? How much have I practiced it? How can I come against it? How can I think about it, frame it differently? How can I fight for a perspective that will be life-giving in this? In the midst of having a cancer diagnosis or something else, how can I be at peace? Actually, the word peace or shalom means to be at one. And that's really talking about integrity or wholeness. How can I be together again? So uh, instead of being fragmented and stuck, it seems like to me we have a chance to do some of this work to step out of that space and to begin to realize, hey, I can push back against all this message, all the noise. And when I wrote the article based on that little line, music and silence, and we're going to cover it up with noise. To me, COVID is a grand example of noise.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
There's so much noise that it's split us, it's separated us, it's isolated us, it's made us lonely, it's kept us from connecting. We have a poor relationship with ourselves as a result. It's being exposed. We don't know what to do with it. Nobody's out there to help us. And I'm going to go back to the safety thing. I don't think safety is the key. I think dealing and grappling with issues and the pain. And as we said last time in Romans 5, he says, celebrate glory, celebrate tribulation at the same time. And if you can't celebrate tribulation, you can't listen to your own soul. You won't listen to your own soul. And it's unequally distributed, by the way. Some people have a lot more obvious tribulation than others. That's a bad place to stop, isn't it?
Well, I'm just trying to figure out where to go from here. There are a lot of people that have lived for decades not being self-aware, or they have practiced stuffing for years, so it's a habit. But
They're
then
victims.
victims, yeah, yeah.
And it's all throughout history. What do victims want mostly? Revenge, somebody to blame. Can't figure a way out of it. I don't go to movies much anymore because, well, for lots of reasons, but uh, I'm surprised at how often the revenge motivation is the storyline, the substantive storyline.
All the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's in the news all the time too. It's become it's a very much a standard of behavior in our culture.
It
Yeah.
is. It is.
Not kind of an automatic response.
We're adversarial. That's the nature of consumeristic, you know, uh, world we live in. That's the nature of the way we do business. That's the nature of the way the laws are written. They are adversarial. And so to learn how to be relational, how to negotiate, how to wrestle, how to engage in a healthy relationship, not one that capitulates and will keep you from ever having to struggle at all. Struggle is the way you grow. You don't grow without it. Nobody does. And we want grace to remove that. We want safety so that we don't have to have any uncomfortableness.
Mm-hmm.
And all you have to do is be in the woke generation and have all the cultural overlay that's pressing on us to try to make everything smooth. Well, it's what it's going to do is continue to dumb us down, keep us from having access to our own souls, have no individuals, really, because individuals are always going to be messing things up. And they're going to slow stuff down and they're going to not make stuff as efficient. Sorry, life is not very efficient.
It's really kind of a daily thing of being undone, isn't it?
Yes,
Because
yes.
it's something that can be habitual, that mindset. And so it's a daily thing to really go to God and ask for him to do his work in us, to
Plow,
break down the
yeah,
behavioral
yeah.
facade.
Plow the field, get it ready for harvest. I don't know, whatever metaphors seem to work. I just think I love the word undone. I think being undone is the best way to move on. It's the best way to access your soul. I think when you've got it together, that's not what wholeness means. Wholeness means that I'm able to be undone. Yet again,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
we I love philosophy. Always have. It's what uh, it's what actually settled my soul early on as I was struggling with theology. Uh, Theology is man-made in a sense, and I was trying to make sense out of life, in a sense, my life in particular. And I grew up in the church, so I had a different road to take than a lot of people had. I wasn't wrestling with whether God existed or not. I think I was wrestling in part with whether he was good or not, and whether I could really trust this storyline to hold water, et cetera. And I now believe it's the best single philosophy on the planet, but we're afraid to teach it as a philosophy because it's so exposing. It just turns on the light, and now we don't want to do that. And so we back away from it. And so when you talk about being undone, I think that's what grace does. Grace actually comes to us and says, I want you to grow. And you don't have to be who you used to be, and you don't have to think the way you used to think. And you are free to take action, in a way that you didn't. You're not a victim. And if you can start thinking that way, what happens is that you then begin to take responsibility, and then you can be creative with your own life, and you can choose to live in California or Colorado, or any other place that starts with C that's merits being lived in, Calabasas or somewhere. I just think the challenge is to be open to growing, open to the future. Somebody said, why did you move at your age? And isn't that really hard? And my daughter was one that said that. And I said, well, babe, it is. But life's got to be lived. I'm not going to sit around and just not do something. I could. It's not a moral thing. I don't get extra credit because I moved. But what it does is it disturbs you, right? It changes you. It challenges you. It stretches you. It exposes you. And I've not liked all the exposure I've seen in the last 3 months. I've got to wait 3 years.
Like change to bring out the frailty and the stuff that we just don't want people to see.
We so want to be in control, and control is perfectionism, and it's the opposite of being whole. Wholeness is letting go, opening my hands, relaxing. Cease striving, it says, Psalm 46:10. Cease striving, let go, relax, know that I'm God. Why? Because if I grab a hold of something, it's going to be something short of him, typically. I'm going to form some kind of an idol around my health, my age, my place in life, my wealth, my knowledge, my something, instead of pure joy, pure connection, real love, however you want to talk about it. I was listening to an opera the other day because I grew up on it. And Nancy said, our grandkids would just roll their eyes one day. I said, well, they probably would. It's a shame because there's some phenomenal music. I mean, even though the storylines are like country western stories, they're horrible stories, most of them. But then most of life is freighted with that same kind of storyline anyway.
Definitely.
So instead of avoiding it, how can we embrace it in ever fuller ways? And as we embrace it, infuse it with the hope that Romans 5 talks about. He says, you celebrate tribulation, you will persevere. Perseverance produces character that's testable, proven character, and proven character gives you access to hope. Well, people want hope without going through the process. So they want hope without perseverance, without tribulation, without having to persevere. And then if they don't persevere, there's no character developed. So no character is no self-awareness, right? And so then when something crops up in me and it's separate from the rest of me, I can't address it because I'm fragmented. And so that takes on a life of its own, and it has its own way with me. Maybe I'm an addict. Maybe I'm maybe I'm a power hungry person because that's the only way I can feel like I'm in control again, instead of being at ease in my own soul, so that I can taste and see that the Lord is good. Taste and see that today is beautiful. There is beauty every day. We miss it because we're victims most of the time.
Wow, some good stuff for us to consider today. Thank you again for being with us.
You're gracious. I appreciate it.
Look forward to talking again. Your conversations are always great. Thank you, Hud.
You bet. Thanks for the opportunity.
Sure.